Welcome to Lesson 3. Today we will be adding our third layer. We're going to be using color and color theory a lot today to bring form and depth to our portraits. Alright, let's get to work. For the supplies in Lesson 3, I use a lot of colorful media. Now, one of the main things I use are these alcohol markers. Now, these resemble watercolors, but they're a lot easier to use because they are in marker form. They usually have a wide tip or broad tip and a thin tip for finer details. Now, the brand I use doesn't really matter. I use all the brands. There's Concept. This one, Touch New. This one's Ohuhu, even though the brand is off of it. And I also use Copics and Touch. They don't really matter to me because they pretty much do the same thing. These are Tombows. These are thinner, but they still come in wide tips. And Tombow gives a really cool effect that I'll show you when I draw with them. And they're longer, way longer than normal alcohol markers. I also use watercolors. This is a 36 set watercolor, and it has different shades of a color, and it kind of goes up darker, 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 darker. This is my other go-to tool. This is my brush pen, or my water brush pen, and this is cool because the water is stored in the pen, or the material. So what I can do is I can add the water in it instead of having a separate cup of water, a separate brush. Everything is together. I could just squeeze the water out. And clean my brush that way. You still got to wipe a little bit, but it's still quicker than having to fill up a cup and then clean in the water and then etc., etc. So this is my go-to water media tool to use, and I can blend colors as I go. I also use acrylic paint, usually white. Doesn't matter to me. This is Liquitex, but it doesn't really matter. And the acrylic paint allows me to create different shades of watercolor and highlights as well. Like in video 1, I had this. This is my white gel pen. This also helps me with creating shadows. Right, these are all our materials, and we're ready to go. So we're going to get started now using our markers. And I like to put watercolor on top of marker instead of marker on top of watercolor because it just works better when I do it that way. Now, the first thing I do before I start using any of these markers on paper, on my actual drawing paper, is I test them out. So what I do is I have a swatch, and what I do is I take the broad tip of the marker and I draw maybe 3 swatches of something. And then next to it, I write the number of the marker. That way I know, okay, Touch New, this is number 135. And this is what 135 looks like. When I do it this way, all I have to do is look at the number and the color, and then I place it down on my paper. Now it helps you make less mistakes when you're coloring, and it helps you pick out the color you actually want to use. You don't want to start coloring and then it's not what you want, and then you have to fix it, and you kind of waste time that way. So it's easier to just, once you get your set of markers, do this immediately. Make a swatch, write down the number. Mine isn't in any kind of order, but it's easier if you just put them in order. But usually I just have sets of color. I have my blues, I have my yellows, my skin tones that I usually use, shades of purples, pinks, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to place this in front of me so I can see it and move it around. And then I'm going to start coloring in or coloring on top of my strokes. I don't have an order for how I start coloring with the markers like I do with the pens and the pencil. So I just pick a color and I just find a spot on here that has the same color, and I start getting to work. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see exactly what I'm doing. One thing you should do though is start with lighter colors first. With these alcohol markers, you cannot put lighter on top of darker. It won't work. So you have to put lighter and darker on top of lighter colors. So I'm just layering colors on top. This is pink. These tombows are long, or tombows, so you can get really good angles when coloring in. And I usually use the broad tip of the markers rather than the fine tip. Just a personal preference. And I have my markers laid out in front of me so I could just pick them up and work with them as I see them, just like with the pens. Being sure to have my color swatch in front of me. Now there are some areas in the face that are lighter. That means I have pen where it should be completely white, and I'll show you what I do with those areas. And I try to fill in and cover up as much of the pen as possible so you can see it, but there's also no white space, no visible, unintentional white space. I like to do small strokes with these markers too, or round rotations too as well. Remember though, light first, dark on top. I'm doing the darker on the light now. Notice that your shadows are going to start to come in, and your highlights on the outsides will start to pop up a little bit more. Now when coloring the lips, I like to use highlighters because highlighters come in some pretty vibrant colors. So I do maybe one layer of highlighter for a base color. And then I can add other shades of the other pens on top. Gives it a really cool look. Look at those lips though. Some of these markers you have to do more than one layer on top of each other for the color to actually show. So just experiment with it before you actually start doing your actual drawing. That's why we make the color swatch. Help us eliminate that issue beforehand. Now the watercolors, you can put on top of any of these. You can put on top of the pen and on top of the markers. So I'm gonna get my brush tool, already has water in it, and I'm going to put a darker shade on top where the jaw is. So I'm mixing my darker shade now. Maybe I'll put a little darker. And if you want, you can test it on your swatch paper. So I'm going to put this darker shade on the side of the cheek. Maybe add a little bit more water so it's a little bit more transparent. here and around the eye. And the cool thing you could do with watercolors is you can blot it out. So you can take a napkin and just blot that color in. Makes it dry faster too. So I just blotted in the color. And I could go ahead and put the marker back on top. Let me do a dark color so you can see. See? I'm putting the marker right on top of the watercolors. Let me move over to the ear. Color in parts of the ear. The ear is like a vibrant shade of pink, so I'm going to use that highlighter to make it pop even more. Now for shadows, I usually also use these gray tone markers. And the gray tone markers are really good for that. Adding subtle or even harsh shadows as well. And harsh just means that it's darker. So I'm going to add some dark shadows. And I'm doing this right on top of that watercolor I added. The more I rub, the darker it will get. Now, I need to go back in and add highlights. And highlights are the lighter parts of the face. And I do that with the white gel pens. Now the parts of the face with highlights are in between the bridge of the nose, underneath the eyes, around the eyes, in the eyes, around the nose, around the lip line, and the chin and the jaw. So I'm going to be adding a lot of white highlights to this image. Like I said, there's two different pens. This one is instant, this one is not. So the color will show up after a while when using this one. And this is for more subtle coloring. So I'm using the same hatching technique for this. Directional hatching. And cross hatching. the color is gonna start popping up afterwards. Let me do it with the instant one to show you. The color's already brighter instantly. And I'm just gonna hatch and cross hatch around the face where I see highlights. There's a lot of highlights in his jaw line. So I'm gonna fill it with highlights. Hatching, cross hatching again. And on this side, even though there's a lot of shadows on this side of the face, there's still a lot of highlights. And I'm gonna do them light with the faded white gel pen. So it'll start appearing later on as I go on. There's also a lot of highlights in the lip. This brings form to the lip, makes it pop out a bit more instead of looking really flat. Now your lip will start popping out a bit more. Going back in with some darker tones. There's some orange in the lip, surprisingly, as well. There's some shadows near his jawline. Highlights near his ear. Both ears, actually. And you can do this to do little outlines as well. Lots of highlights near his eye. Above his eyebrows. And another cool thing I like to do is I like to mix acrylics with watercolors. So off to the side of my watercolor swatch, I'll put some white. And then I can start lightening my watercolor tones this way. So let me do a light shade of pink. So I have dark pink. Let me clean my brush. Squeeze, squeeze, clean it out. So I'm gonna have some pink, pick up some pink. And then I'm gonna pick up some white, kind of rub it into my pink. Now the cool thing about these watercolors is even if these colors dry on, even if the acrylic dries on top of it, you could just scrape it off. Now I want this really light, so let me add a lot of white. So instead of having to mix a white acrylic and a pink acrylic, I've made a pink tone of acrylic using the watercolor and the white acrylic paint. And I could just paint that on top and wait for it to dry. And the cool thing about acrylic is acrylic dries super fast. Make another shade of pink. Squeeze some water in there. paint it on top. Put it in spots where I see a lot of pink. Ears, nose, chin, under the eyes. In the ears, neck, shoulders. Let me zoom in. And what I could do with this is I can, same thing, blot it so it dries quicker. And I could just go back in with pen and draw on top of it. Draw my pen lines back on top. Let me add some other shades of color. I can even put marker on top of it because now it's acrylic. And acrylic, light colored acrylics, take these markers really well on top of them. Let me move on to the hair. Now with the hair and these markers, it's probably it's the same steps. Light colors first, dark colors on top. Now he has a brownish shade of hair, brownish, blackish. So I'm gonna start with brown, a light brown layer first on the bottom as my first base layer. Then I can put a darker tone on top. Just filling it in. Same with the beard, because he does have this tone in his beard too. And then I can start adding darker colors on top. Now the hair is also a good opportunity to use your pens again, and I'll do that in a little bit. So use some pen work back into the hair. So let me add some more highlights. There's some highlights in the hair as well. In his eye. His eye is a shade of blue. So I'll probably color it its original shade. Adding shades on top of shades. Now, if you're the experimental type, go ahead and try doing this different ways. Maybe you come up with a way that this can come up with some cool effects. Let me go in and fill in his eyebrow. His eyebrows are lighter than I drew them, but so on, so forth we go. You can also kind of smudge these markers before they dry. Gives you also a very cool effect. So before it actually dries, you can smudge it out. Spread it out with your fingers. Go and add some more highlights. I'm forever adding highlights because there will forever be highlights on this. And it's okay to go back in and add more to your portrait. They're there, add them. There's some highlights in his hair. Let me use the instant color. There's also some highlights you can add for his facial hair, on his chin, jawline, and ears. And I'm going to continue doing this throughout the face. And arms. And at the end of this stage, if you have your pens nearby, you can go ahead and add back in any outlines you felt got covered up too much with pen, not with pen, with marker, and make them pop a little bit more. Just draw them back into the face. Because the pens work on top of all this stuff too. Very versatile tools you have. hatching, cross hatching again. I want to go in with some more highlights on the nose so it looks a little bit more round. And then I'm going to go in, I'm going to start outlining. In the inside of the face. Bring those facial features back to view with the outline. Like the eyes, the eye line, the lip, outlines really make your portrait pop. You'll start to notice the portrait showing itself a little bit more. You can use your outline pen to add details to the hair. This is the point where you'd be focused on little details of the hair. And you can, like I said before, go back in with the pen and add things you might have missed. Now that you've seen it completely colored in with your Copics or your whatever alcohol marker or watercolor you choose to use, you see it all colored in and you're like, okay, maybe I should fix this part right here or add some more to here or do this to that. And this is a stage where you would do that. You can bring more whites back in, more dark tones back in, no tones back in, up to you. In the end, it's your rendition of this image. Add some more color. So all I'm doing now is I'm outlining. And then I'm gonna choose a color for my background. Not background, my shirt. Now for the shirt color, I usually do it all black, solid black. And I use my Sharpie for that. This is the Magnum Sharpie, which means that it fills more space quick. And I usually use a dark color or a solid color for my for clothing, because when we move on to step 3, our background, we're gonna put a lot of color back there. And we don't want them competing with each other. We want the colors to complement each other. I don't know if you can really see it very well, but whenever you put the tombows on top of completely black Sharpie, so you have black on black, but it works a way that you end up getting different shades of the black because they're not blending in with each other. And this helps making like folds appear to be in the shirt. Let me quickly go ahead and fill in his glasses. And I'm going to use the hatching technique on the inside to create a illusion of a lens being there. Thank you so much for getting even more colorful with me.